Welcome to Attic Raiders Retro Reviews, where today we're taking a look at a family favourite and flipping it on its head. Join us as we explore Connect 4 Flip. Connect 4 Flip was released by Hasbro in the year 2000 and is an abstract strategy game for 2 players aged 8 and up. It is of course based on the hugely popular game Connect 4. The original Connect 4 was first released by Milton Bradley in 1974, following on from a long line of horizontally played or three-dimensionally played 3 in a row or 4 in a row type games, which potentially stretch back hundreds of years. There's a legend that British naval explorer Captain James Cook played a wooden game with dropped balls almost identical to Connect 4 during his great voyages, which began in 1768. It's said that he spent so much time playing it that the game became known as the Captain's Mistress. There is, however, no hard evidence that this intriguing story is actually true. The original Connect 4 proved hugely successful, and since its original release in the 1970s has been in print all throughout the decades, and it can still be found in stores today. But that hasn't stopped Hasbro trying to find new and inventive twists on a winning idea. Apart from the standard classic game of Connect 4, it's also been produced in a variety of different forms. You can find Connect 4 in 3 dimensions, with balls bounced into the board, with counters fired onto the board by catapult, with counters fired out of the board by Nerf gun darts in cylindrical rotating form, with individually rotating columns, and, as we'll see in this game, where the whole board can be rotated. As in most abstract strategy games, the box art is really not very much to write home about. We've got lots of bright, bold, contrasting colours with purples and greens here, but the big selling point is the actual mechanism, and Hasbro is really trying to push it here. We've got the tagline, "The counters stay when you spin to play," and with the bold claim, "It defies the laws of gravity," Hasbro are really focusing in on this gimmick here. And of course, that's just to be expected, because it's exactly what makes this different from all the other copies of Connect 4 which have been produced throughout the years and which anybody has already got. Connect 4 is a firm favourite and is played by children throughout the world. At the school that I work at, every single classroom has a copy of Connect 4 in the games cupboard, or if not the official game, then one of the many derivative knockoffs. But how does Connect 4 Flip compare to the hugely popular original? Is it as good as the classic? Is it better? Or is it just more of the same? Let's take a closer look and find out. The game comes with 24 orange counters and 24 green counters. You can see that the counters have got the Milton Bradley MB logo on both sides. They've got this little stem on one side here and a hole on the other. The hole just means that you can stack them together like this, which helps with ease of storage, but it's not really used in the game. These stems though are integral for the game, so if you're buying a copy, make sure that these are not damaged. Because with kids playing this game, they are definitely prone to damage and they might snap off. Thankfully these ones haven't snapped off, but they are quite close, and if they're misshapen like this, then they're not really going to fit in the frame and they're not going to be much use. We've also got our game tray, which is a really nice solid piece of blue plastic. We've got this really chunky and solid plastic grid, which differs from the normal Connect 4 grid in that it doesn't have individual circle holes in it. It's got these lines which have got these slight wobble to them, but this is really well made and it's got quite a heft to it. And we've got our 2 plastic end pieces which are going to hold the grid in place. To set up the game, we're going to take our base and one of our end pieces. We're going to then slot that together and snap it into place, and that will hold quite firmly. We're going to do that with both sides so that that is ready to go. With that set up, we simply take the grid, slot it into the top here so that it's able to spin freely, and that's us ready to go. To play the game then, it's basically your normal rules for Connect 4, which everyone and their gran knows how to play. But in case you've been living underneath a rock since birth, let's go over them. Basically, players take it in turn, alternating placing their counters into the grid, and the first one to get 4 in a row, either horizontally, vertically or diagonally, is the winner. But with this version, there's a few differences. When placing your counters into the grid, you've got to make sure that you put it in the correct way around, because as you can see here, there are little slots which you need to make sure that you line up with the stem on the counter. If you put it in the wrong way round, it's not going to go in at all, so you do have to make sure that you put it the right way round. As soon as you put your counter into the grid, it's not going to make the traditional and very satisfying shink as it moves down the column to the bottom, because in this game, in fact, it's not going to move down this column, it's going to move down this line, this plastic piece between the spaces, unlike the original game. As soon as I put this in, it wobbles side to side down here, which is just a bit different. Play then passes to your opponent, and they're going to start trying to create their own row of 4 or try and stop you from creating your row of 4. Now, if this was traditional Connect 4, they would simply drop their piece into any one of these columns in order to get their piece to go where they want it to, which they can do. That is one of your options, but in this version there are 2 options. You can either drop it straight in like this, or you can take the grid, flip it 180 degrees and then drop your piece in. And as you can see, when you flip the grid, any pieces which have already been placed there stay exactly where they are, almost magically defying gravity. But of course, sadly, us muggles don't have the luxury of magic, so we have to make do with some quite simple yet ingenious engineering. When you drop a disc into the frame, it moves along this piece of plastic with the stem working along this track here until it gets down into its final position. However, when you turn the frame upside down and it reverses, it falls down into one of these little nooks here or here, and that's what holds it in place and stops it from going down any further. Players have to be aware that as they enter their pieces into the board, trying to make their rows of 4 and trying to stop their opponents from making rows of 4, that whenever they flip the board in order to enter their pieces, they are going to end up not being able to use some of the columns, because these counters obviously are blocking these columns from having more counters added into them. They're only going to be able to add counters into some of these other ones, and as soon as they do that, then that column then becomes blocked from putting more counters into it when you flip it round the other way. It may not always be obvious at first from the current orientation, but eventually somebody is going to end up in a position where they get 4 in a row and they win the game. When a game is over, either because one person's won or you've reached a stalemate, then we take this little orange peg here and we squeeze it together, which takes out most of the pieces. These ones, of course, won't, so we need to flip that over and do the same on the other side until the board is clear, ready for another game. Once you've won, you can either stop there if you wish, or you can play best of 3, taking one of your counters and placing it into the number 1 slot down here to show that you've won 1 game. As soon as you win a second game, you move it up to the number 2 slot, and if you win a third game, you move it up to the number 3 slot, showing that you're the overall champion. As with the original Connect 4, this is a hugely simple game to play and to learn. It's very, very quick gameplay, and you're going to get through several games of this before you get bored and want to do something else. Connect 4 is great because it teaches children all about basic strategy and that their actions have consequences both for them and for their opponent. Now, you can actually play this game like the original Connect 4 if you want to, just simply by not flipping it. But of course, because you've got that flipping feature, you might as well use it. And if you're going to use it, I found that it's really quite important to start using it early on in the game. If you leave it to too much later in the game, then most of the columns have already been filled up, and when that happens and you flip it, then you can't actually use them, so it kind of diminishes the flipping feature. I do actually really quite like the flipping feature, the fact that the counters stay exactly where you've put them when you turn the board upside down. It doesn't exactly defy the laws of gravity, it is, as I showed you, very basic engineering, but it's a really quite nice design. The fact that the board flips does actually add to the gameplay on this. You do have to think very spatially with this. You can turn the board over as many times as you want before you place a piece, but you've always got to be thinking about what your opponent might be doing, not just in the orientation that you can see the board in, but with it the other way around as well. It's not particularly hard mental gymnastics, but it does add an extra layer to the game, which I do enjoy. And unlike some of the other variations or varieties of Connect 4 which have been made, which rely on skill or dexterity in order to get your counters into the place where you want them, this doesn't have any of that. It's still based purely on strategy. You only have to outthink your opponent. You don't have to be better at bouncing or firing or catapulting than them in order to win the game. As I said before, the components of this are really nicely made. The board is really chunky, good quality. The only thing is the plastic pegs on the counters can be prone to breaking, but you just have to be careful that you're not roughhousing with this. If you treat it with respect, you're not going to have any problems. Just take your time and don't try and force any of the counters the wrong way round into the top of the frame, otherwise you will start snapping pegs. Overall, from a gameplay point of view, yeah, although you can't beat the original Connect 4, it is an absolute family favourite for a reason. I would say, for me, I possibly even like this more. I like the extra dimension to it and the additional thinking involved. If you can find this one out and about, I would recommend it. Well, that's it for this week. If you've enjoyed what you've seen, please remember to like, subscribe, drop a comment down below. What's your favourite version of Connect 4? We'll be back next time with more vintage board games. Until then, we'll see you on the flip side.